As a ServiceNow administrator or developer, or even user in many cases, at some point, you're probably going to need to know how to import data into the ServiceNow database. Whether you're doing an initial load of data, or you're loading some foundational tables, or maybe you're pulling inventory items from some inventory system and loading into the CMDB, building integrations and imports is a fairly common task. And in this video, we're going to cover the process of building integrations and imports using data sources and transform maps, field maps, and scheduled data imports. Welcome to our newly updated ServiceNow Fundamentals series. Jeff here from ServiceNow Simple, where we help you understand the ins and outs of ServiceNow with a focus on keeping things as simple as possible. Some of the keywords to look for in this video include import set table, target table, transform map, field map, data source, coalesce, and scheduled data import. As always, I appreciate you being part of the channel. Subscribe if you haven't. Let's jump into it. So we have some data outside of ServiceNow and we need to get it inside of ServiceNow into one of the database tables. Okay, let's do it. The first thing you should know about importing data into ServiceNow is that the process actually involves moving the data twice. Because why move something once when you can move it twice? In the first move, the data gets pulled from its original location, which is usually outside of the ServiceNow platform, and it gets inserted into what ServiceNow calls an import set table. That import set table is just a sort of staging area that's used to hold the data temporarily inside of ServiceNow prior to processing it and actually moving it to the final target table. Once that's completed, the second move takes the data from the import set table and transforms and transfers it to its final location, the target table. This second move occurs entirely within ServiceNow's platform, so super fast, and it's efficient, which allows us to do some cool things with the data, like data transformations and identification and reconciliation, and I'll show you what some of that means in a bit. We'll call this first move the import, and this second move the transform. And to tell the platform how we want all of this to happen, we need to create three things. We need to create a data source, a transform map, and a set of field maps. Let me define what these things are real quick, and then we'll jump into the UI and we'll do it. First, a data source is a record that tells the platform where to go to find the source data that we're trying to import, how to connect to it, and what data we want to import, what we'd like to name the import set table. So essentially, everything the platform needs to know to process this initial import step. And that record gets created and stored in a database table named data source, sys_data_source. A transform map is a record that tells the platform how to move the data from the import set table to the final target table. So it specifies the connection between the import set table and the target table, and it uses a set of field maps to define how the data should move on a field-by-field basis. So in a way, you can think of a transform map as a group of field maps that specify on a field-by-field basis how to move the data from the import set table to the target table. The transform map gets stored as a record in a table named table transform map. And that's sys_transform_map. And field maps get stored as records in a table named field map, which is sys_transform_entry. Don't worry, this will all make sense when we actually do it, which we'll do now. In the demo, I'll be importing this list of companies, which I've stored in a really simple Excel spreadsheet. It contains 5 rows with columns for the company name, street address, city, state, zip code, the number of employees, and the website URL. And ServiceNow comes out of box with a database table named company. That's core_company. That's built to store company data just like this. It's used by various applications and workflows across the platform for managing services related to working with companies, whether they're customers or vendors or manufacturers or whatever. So We're going to take our spreadsheet of company data, that'll be our data source, and we'll import it into ServiceNow's company table. That'll be our target. Okay, we'll start by creating a data source record to configure the connection between the original source of the data and the import set table, that first step. Fortunately, ServiceNow comes out of box with the ability to pull data from many external sources, including files like comma delimited files or Excel like we're going to do, JDBC databases you can connect to and use SQL to pull the data, LDAP, REST, APIs, and more. I'll start by entering sys_data_source.list in the @nav filter to open the list view of the data source table. That's where we'll create our data source record. Alternatively, you could navigate to System Import Sets, Administration, Data Sources. Takes you to the same place. I can see there are currently 17 data sources configured on my instance. I'm going to create a new one, so I'll click the New button. And I'll give my data source a name. I'm just going to call it Company Data Demo. Next, we specify the label and the name of the import set table. Remember, that's that temporary location where the data gets stored prior to actually processing it and loading it into the target table. I'm going to use the same value for the name, Company Data Demo, as the label, and I'll accept the default table name of u_company_data_demo. Now, this is pretty interesting. All we have to do for the import set table is provide the label and the name. We don't need to worry about creating the table and the fields, choosing the different data types that the data is going to get stored in. ServiceNow does all of that for us automatically the first time we execute the import. It's pretty slick, which you'll see in just a second here. Now we have to tell the platform about the source data, which is handled by populating the type attribute here. I'll drop this down so you can see all of the different types of data sources ServiceNow set up to work with. Depending on which type you select here, the remainder of the form will be made up of the fields needed to configure that type of connection. And I'm going to go ahead and select File, specify that I'm pulling from an Excel spreadsheet. And then I can configure if the file has been zipped, which it hasn't, or which sheet number to pull from, and which row, if any, contains the column headers, which interestingly enough, the column headers will be used to create the field names in the import set table. Okay, the last thing I'll do is configure the method I'll be using to connect to the file. For that, I'm just simply going to upload the spreadsheet and attach it directly to this data source record. And that's it. I'll save my new data source record. Now I'll go ahead and attach this spreadsheet by clicking on the paperclip icon here on the header bar, browsing to my file, and selecting it for attachment. Perfect. So we've configured the first half of our import by creating our new data source record named Company Data Demo. Let's test it out. A couple of things to remember before I do this. Our spreadsheet contains 5 rows of company data, and our import set table is named u_company_data_demo. So after we execute this import, we should see 5 records in our import set table. Let's go. From the data source record, down here in the related links section, we have a couple of ways to test our import. We can either use the test load 20 records link or the load all records link. In our case, it doesn't much matter which one we choose since we only have 5 records anyway. I'm just going to go ahead and use load all records. That kicks off the import and opens this progress page where I can see that my import has completed successfully and that it's processed 5 records that have resulted in 5 inserts into the import set table. Notice down here under this next steps section, we're provided with several useful links. You guys can explore those, including one to go to the newly imported data in our import set table, Company Data Demo. I'll click that to see what we got. And here's the list view of our import set table. I can see it's got 5 records, but I don't recognize any of these fields, and that's because Import set tables are created with some additional fields that are used by the platform to keep track of which import's being processed and the state or status of the import and any errors that might have occurred and some other stuff. But I can personalize the list here and display the fields that I'm interested in. Company name, street address, city, state, zip, number of employees, and website URL. So, just thinking here, the fact that these fields are even available is a really good sign, because these fields were created based upon the column headings of our spreadsheet, so we know our connection worked. And here's the data. Our import looks to have worked perfectly. Now, we need to configure the second part of this, which takes the data from the import set table, loads it into the target table. We do that with a transform map to connect the two tables together, and a set of field maps to connect the individual fields in the tables together. We'll start with a transform map. There are several ways to do this. Probably the simplest way is to open the data source record that we just created and do it from there. I'll open our company data demo data source record. And down here in the related lists, I'm going to access the transforms related list. This is where I'll create the transform map that goes along with this data source. But before I do that, I want to mention real quickly this second tab labeled Robust Transformer. A robust transformer is another method of loading data that's used primarily for importing data into ServiceNow's Configuration Management Database, or CMDB, and we'll be talking about this in an upcoming video. It's kind of like a transform map on steroids. It's a more advanced and powerful method of importing data, provides the ability to choose multiple target tables and create and manage relationships between imported records and some other stuff. But we're keeping it simple in this video, so I'll be using the transforms related list, and I'll click the new button to create a new transform map. I'll name it with the same name we've been using, Company Data Demo. Next thing we'll do is we'll set the source table and the target table. And since we're creating this transform map directly from our data source record, it already knows which import set table to use as the source. So it's pre-populated for us here, but we could change it if we wanted to. And for the target table field, I'll choose the company table, core_company. With that, I'll go ahead and save my changes, which creates our new transform map record. Now you can see we get access to a couple of related lists for our transform. The field maps related list is what we'll use to create the field level mappings that connect the columns in the import set table with the columns in the target table. We have several tools that we can use to do that. First, we could create each field map one at a time manually by clicking the new button here. But ServiceNow provides us with a couple of simpler ways to do this. For example, if we happen to know that the names of the fields in the import set table are the same as the names of the fields in the target table, we could use this Auto Map Matching Fields link. That tool compares the field names in both tables and it attempts to automatically create the appropriate field maps for you. Another method is to use the Mapping Assist tool. I personally like this option because it sort of holds your hand through the process, but it doesn't actually do anything automatically. I'll click the Mapping Assist link to demonstrate how this works. Okay, so this can actually be sort of fun if you're a little bit weird like me. In this left box here, we have all of the fields that exist in our import set table. And in this right box, we have all of the fields that exist in the target table, in our case, the company table. And in the middle, we're going to build our field maps that connect the two fields together. Also notice down here at the bottom, we get a sample record from the source table on the left and the target table on the right, just so we can see some actual field values, which can be helpful. Okay, so let's do this. The order in which we do these really makes no difference other than making sure that the fields match up correctly. So for example, I'm going to start by adding the company name field from the import set table. And I want data from that field to flow to the name field in the company table. Let's do another one. The street address field from the import set table should map to the street field in the company table. Genius! I'm killing this. City maps to city. State maps to state/province. Zip code maps to zip/postal code. And employees maps to number of employees. And website URL maps to website. And that's it. Notice here that you don't have to pull data from every source field, and you don't have to load data into every target field. You just use the ones that you need. Also, just FYI, it is possible to map values from a single source field to multiple target fields if you needed to. I'll go ahead and click Save, which returns us to our transform map record, and now we can see we have 7 field map records in our related list. Okay, one more thing I have to tell you, and it's important, so listen up. Notice this field here labeled coalesce in our related list of field maps. This is a true-false field that the platform uses to determine which fields to use to uniquely identify a record when it's deciding to do an insert or an update. Wait, what? Let me explain. If I left our transform map just as we have it currently with no coalesce field set, and I ran our import, we'd get 5 records inserted into the company table. And that would be great. But what if I ran our import again a second time? We'd get 5 more records inserted, ending up with 10 records in the company table, each duplicated one time. That's because we never told the platform how to identify if a record already exists. That's where these coalesce fields come into play. When we set the coalesce value on a field map to true, we're telling the platform to use that field as the primary key or part of the primary key. In the case of our company data here, for example, I'd probably start by telling the platform to coalesce on the company name field. So I'll set this field's coalesce value to true. Now, when I run my import, the platform will use the value in the company name field that's coming in to check and see if a record already exists in the company table with that name. If one does, it'll process that row by updating the existing record. If a record with that company name doesn't exist, it will insert a new one into the table. So setting the coalesce value is a lot like setting the primary key in a relational database, if you've ever done that before. You're essentially identifying which field or set of fields should be used to uniquely identify and compare each record. Okay, we're all set now to test our transform. And to do that, I can go to the related links section of my transform map and simply click the transform link. That opens a page where I can select a particular import set load and corresponding transform map, and the defaults here are normally correct. And I'll click the transform button. And on the progress page, I can see the transform has completed successfully. Notice some useful links here to dig deeper into how things went. I like to check this transform history link, which shows me that my transform processed in under a second and that it processed 5 records, which resulted in 5 inserts, which is what I expected. Now, just to make sure, I'll open the company table, core company, make sure our data is there. I'm just going to sort it on the updated column to bring the most recent changes to the top. And here, I can see our 5 company records have been created. So, our data that was outside of ServiceNow is now inside of ServiceNow, resting nicely within the database. And now you know how to build a standard integration by creating a data source to import the data from an external source to an import set table, and a transform map and field maps to transform the data and move it to the target table. Let me show you just one more thing before we wrap up, and that's how to schedule a data import to run automatically. You might be thinking, why would I ever need to schedule an import to run automatically? And in the case of our little spreadsheet example here, that's a good question. More realistically though, Many of the data integrations and imports that are built within ServiceNow are used to regularly pull data from legacy applications, oftentimes that are still being used outside of ServiceNow. In cases like those, you might run your import on Monday, and by Tuesday, the data in ServiceNow is stale because the changes have been made in the legacy system. Scheduled data imports are the solution to that problem. With a scheduled data import, you can set up your data integration to run on some recurring basis, like weekly or daily or even hourly, depending on your requirements. To set one up, you create a record in a table named Scheduled Data Import. That's scheduled _ data _ import. Let's do it. I'll open the list view for that table by navigating to System Import Sets, Administration, Scheduled Imports. And I want to create a new scheduled import, so I'll click the New button. I'll give my scheduled data import a name, and I'm going to use the same name I've been using, Company Data Demo. Next, I need to select which data source I want to automate. That's our Company Data Demo data source. There are some additional attributes here for further configuring how I want the import to execute. I'm going to leave them with their default values and move over here to the Run field. This is where I define the recurrence upon which I want my import to execute. I could choose daily, for example, and then specify a time value, or I can set it to run weekly on a certain day at a certain time, or monthly. I'll let you experiment with those, but I will mention this option, after parent runs. What this one does is allow you to create a sort of chain of scheduled imports, where when one completes, the next one begins. It's pretty cool for processing a set of data imports from some legacy application where the data needs to be loaded in some particular order. I'm just going to keep this super simple and just choose daily. I'll submit my changes, and now when the clock strikes midnight each day, my import will be kicked off automatically. That way, I can keep the data in ServiceNow in sync with the data in the legacy source system, at least within 24 hours or so. And thanks to those coalesce fields we set, existing records will be updated with changes and new records will be created as needed. Okay, so let's run through a quick recap of what we just did and then wrap this lesson up. Here's our original diagram. Now let's personalize it for our example. To start, the original source of our data residing outside of ServiceNow platform was an Excel spreadsheet named companydata.xlsx. The first thing we did was create a new data source record named Company Data Demo. As part of that data source, we specified how to connect to our spreadsheet, and we set the label and name of our import set table to Company Data Demo. That's u_company_data_demo. Next, we created a new transform map record named Company Data Demo. Within that record, we specified the Company Data Demo import set table as the source and the core company table as the target. We specified 7 field maps to route the data at the field level. And finally, we created a new scheduled data import record named Company Data Demo, which specified that the Company Data Demo data source and its corresponding import and transform should be executed automatically each night at midnight. That's it for data integrations and imports. As with most things in ServiceNow, there are several different methods you can use to load data. Now you know what I believe is probably the most common method. We'll probably revisit this topic again when we talk in more detail about the CMDB and robust data transforms. But till then, thanks for watching this one. I'll see you in the next one.